Let's get on with the first story. My mom ends up ruining the life of her ex-boss after an exit interview. This happened about 30-odd years ago, and my mother recounted it recently during a family dinner. So back in the 1990s, my mom worked for this big-time company, we'll call it Company W, as an accountant. Her boss, the head of finance, was a sleazy guy, and despite being semi-wealthy, it was a big company and married with kids. He always tried to pick up younger women in the office. Eventually, after a few years, my mom, being the amazing accountant that she is, noticed small irregularities in several statements. I don't know the technical terms, but Mom realized that someone was embezzling the company's money for at least a couple of decades. Concerned, she brought it up to the head of finance, who proceeded to demean her, call her names, botch her claim, and basically threatened to fire her if she brought it up again. My mother is not one to start crying and instead sought to prove him wrong. However, a couple of months later, head of finance brought in a new lady, young. She was legit blonde, fresh out of college to train under Mom. My mother instantly knew what this was and started putting out feelers for a new job. In the meanwhile, she trained the younger lady, who, to quote my mom, was not the brightest bulb. Now, Company W had a policy when an employee was going to be fired. If the employee was being fired for reasons other than rule breaking, violations, etc., they would be allowed to say that they quit to be able to give their week's notice and get pay. A fair policy. So one day, Mom was summoned by the head of finance and told that he was firing her. She quickly counteracted and used the policy to her advantage, which angered the head of finance, but he had to comply. The malicious compliance I know you're waiting for. Head of finance told my mother in a rather rude way that since she was going about it that way, she might as well do an exit interview. My mother literally had a light bulb moment and said to him that in that case, she would. To note, an exit interview is a formal way of leaving a job, akin to an interview for getting the job. It's a way for employees to share their experience and why they're leaving for records, including HR human resources. You can see where this is going. So she was scheduled for the exit interview. When she went in, my mother had to, of course, bring in files relating to her work. I can't recall the exact reason, other than it having to be relevant to her reason for leaving, and show it to the interviewer. My mom brought in 3 large boxes of files, each one containing evidence of the embezzlement. She then presented it to the interviewer, who my mother told me was rather stunned, and proceeded to hand over all the evidence and proceed with her exit, including talking about the head of finance's reaction and how not long after the new lady was brought in to replace her, Mom then left the company that day, got new employment, and moved on. It was a decade later that she learned what happened. My dad was a delivery driver at the time and actually made a delivery to Company W. While there, he talked with an employee, mentioned my mom had worked there and how she left, and the employee told him quite the juicy story. In the year following my mother's departure and interview, her evidence was brought to HR and the CEO, who ordered an internal investigation. Hidden cameras were placed in the accounting division. Every file made was screened, avenue photocopied, tiny details scrutinized, and bank records triple-checked. I think you can see where this is going. Yup, the head of finance was embezzling from Company W, but it gets better. They got him, on camera, making out with the new lady inside the main office after hours. To add insult to injury, the cameras also caught him being cruel to those under him, touching other women, etc. But the biggest thing was still the embezzlement. Head of finance managed to, in over 30 years, steal over $1 million in Company W's earnings, from his days as a mere accountant and all through his promotions. Now, the exact way he was able to get that much over time wasn't told to my dad. I doubt the employee knew, but he did know the fallout. Head of finance was summoned to the Big Cheese's office the day after the evidence complied. And let's just say head of finance wished he had simply been fired. He was arrested for embezzlement and for sexual misconduct or something like that, as well as a few other things my mom can't recall. The new lady who came in actually revealed that he had brought her in after starting to date her and even revealed to her what he was doing. Her job basically had been to help him cover it up so they could live the rich life. She didn't even know what exactly accounting was, other than managing money. The perfect cover, so to speak. And if the now ex-head of finance thought being arrested and charged was bad enough, when his wife found out, the employee who told my dad this hadn't been present when the wife had come in while the ex-head of finance had been let out, but a friend of his had seen what happened. She had just gone up, smacked the now ex-head of finance, screamed obscenities at him before saying she'll be seeing him in court for a divorce. While my dad couldn't learn what exactly happened next, what was clear was that the guy's life was ruined, And my mom, while not a vindictive person by any means, did feel somewhat joyful over the outcome. The lesson to be learned here: never screw with an accountant who actually knows what they're doing. TLDR, my mother discovers signs of embezzlement, gets demeaned, and then slowly replaced by her boss. He offhandedly tells her she might as well do an exit interview while quitting. My mother does so but shows evidence against him that ends up with him being charged for embezzlement and getting divorced by his wife for being with another woman. Now to the second story. Do you know who I am? Been reading many of these military compliance stories and made me remember my own. So when you're working a gate or any sort of security post, you get used to some of the same people coming through and don't really need to check their ID, such as your relief. The same delivery driver that's already come through 5 times on just your shift. Friends or family, so you just wave them through. Counts as visual confirmation. Well, we had some joker that was getting kicked out of the military and decided he didn't really care who was coming and so would just wave everyone through whether he knew who they were or not. Well, lo and behold, leadership finds out and rips him a new one and comes down with a policy of visual confirmation is no longer an adequate means of access, and that we have to check every ID of every individual entering the installation. So we figure it's stupid, but hey, rules are rules. So the day goes on without much problem besides the random serious. You know who I am, we were just hanging out and telling them, hey, I know, but the policy has changed and it's 100% checks. And they realized, hey, you're right, things change all the time. Everything was going fine until the base commander, a 2-star, comes through and we ID him. Do you know who I am? Why are you IDing me? Of course, sir, you're Maj General Snuffy, base commander. Then why are you IDing me? Well, because the policy that you signed says specifically, and I quote, absolutely no one is allowed through by visual confirmation. So after a few choice words about how he's the base commander, and saying he'll make sure it's dealt with appropriately, we get his ID and offer him his proper customs and courtesies, and off he goes. Well, not more than 3 minutes later we get a call from the flight chief about how dare we stop the base commander. We are never to do it again. And we're just like, well, the policy says to stop everyone and anyone. Yeah, the policy only lasted that shift until they changed it to pretty much no one but the top select individuals. Pretty much anyone with a picture on our wall was allowed visual confirmation. Everyone else has to be ID'd. Still was funny to stop the base commander due to his policy that he signed and didn't think it could possibly bite him in the ass. And on to the third story. Of course, I will follow the belt rule and get a student expelled. Repost because removed from Pro Revenge. Sorry for the long post. Some context. From 2001 to 2010 I am 24, went to a truly vile Catholic school that was a part of our local church that we attended. The students and staff were homophobic, racist, and xenophobic place, and being a goth-lating student I was bullied by students and staff alike. This school had a pretty strict dress code requiring students to wear a uniform, and the boys had to tuck in their shirts and wear a belt. This was a problem for me because the staff and students would love to hit me with a ona- to punch where the students would steal my belt during gym class, and the teachers would conveniently do a belt check, and this would result in me getting countless detentions. It was hard to prove that this was happening, as having an extra belt in your locker wasn't suspicious, and we never labeled our belts because who steals belts? Anyway, after my parents caught wind of what was happening, they immediately scheduled a meeting with the principal, vice principal, and the pastor of the church. In my parents' defense, they didn't know how shitty the school was, and after learning about the racist, homophobic views of the Catholic Church, we promptly left and joined a much more accepting church. Dad, so it has come to my attention that my son keeps getting detention for dress code violations caused by other students stealing his belt. Principal, well, we actually have no evidence to prove this, and we just suspect that your son is not wearing a belt as a way to rebel. Me, I absolutely wear a belt every day. Pastor, God requires us to take responsibility for our shortcomings, and we shouldn't blame others for our shortcomings. Principal, well, regardless of the reason, your son needs to wear a belt, and failure to do so from this point forward will result in more drastic consequences. Before my dad can say another word, my mom thanks to the three for their time and asks for a printed copy of the dress code, and on her way out she says to me, let's buy you a belt that none of these racists, homophobes would ever want to be caught with. So on to the malicious compliance. The next day I walk into school wearing a rainbow sequin belt that had the words gay pride in all caps. I had recently come out as bi, so my mom wanted me to be proud of it and bought a series of belts to help me express myself. I was immediately called into the principal's office and was given a lecture on the sanctity of marriage and whatnot. TBH, I wasn't listening. After she finished her tirade, I handed her a letter that my mom told me to give her when I was inevitably going to be called into the office to be reprimanded. Just like every other day, my belt was stolen at lunch, and when the teacher tried to get me in trouble, I asked her politely to check the lockers of my classmates. Upon doing so, she found my rainbow sequin belt in the locker of one of my bullies and asked him where he got this belt from, and instead of lying and saying it was his, he didn't want to be labeled as being gay because of homophobia. He admitted to stealing it. At this point, I had him dead to rights and politely asked him for all of my belts back or compensation for them. His parents ended up having to write us a check because the dummy admitted to throwing all of them away, and since the school kept a log for each belt-related infraction, I could prove he had stolen 20+ belts. The student was expelled for breaking one of the 10 commandments, and the pastor himself was forced to apologize to me. I left shortly after that and went to a school that accepted me and made tons of lifelong friends. Now on to the fourth. Come back during night shift. Stay the whole shift if you believe delays are not too long. The second time posting here. This story is from 2014. Don't work there anymore since 2015. Setting: I was working in a top Asian brand factory in the engineering department. One of my main and many tasks was giving support to production with new models, and also training staff when product rework was needed. At this point, I'm a year into my engineering position, and am sick of my work environment, as it was hostile in many ways and was common for me to work 65+ hours almost every week. Overtime was paid. This is relevant later. For reference, my work schedule in the paper was 5 workdays, with 10.2 hours each day including breaks and lunch. But I ended up also going most Saturdays, and staying late on weekdays also. The story: one Friday morning, my team manager Jeff, not real name obviously, requested me to go home and return during the second shift because there was rework needed on some product and they need to members from our team during said rework. Jeff's instructions were as follows: go home, get some sleep, come back at the beginning of a second shift, give rework instructions to staff members, supervise until they finish, and then send me a report with the outcome via email. Stay overtime if needed. Simple enough. I just ask about my morning hours, and he states that the time I have worked that morning would be added to my overtime hours, and that I work second shift as normal hours from 7:30 p.m. to 4:20 a.m., and to stay longer if necessary to ensure everything was okay, paid overtime also. This whole exchange was done verbally, but in front of the department manager, so no worries. After talking to me, he went to a coworker, we will call him Jim, to ask him to also do the same as me. Cool, we agreed, and I clocked out at exactly 10 a.m. times 2.5 hours into our shift, and then head out to the parking lot. Jim stayed to more hours due to another pending issue. Here comes the first problem. I go out to the parking lot, and it's pouring like Jumanji flooded house pouring. I get to my car and it's blocked by many other cars parked in prohibited positions. We were having big issues with this. Not enough parking space and can't get out to head home. I return to the security guard's post to get out of the rain and call Jeff. He doesn't pick up, was in a meeting, or so he says, so I call my supervisor Brad instead, telling him that I can't leave due to the parking issue. Minutes pass, and Brad comes to the parking lot and has a little flash of genius. He sees his car is not blocked and proposes we switch cars and exchange back on Monday. I agree and go on my way back home, somewhat tired, hungry, and soaking from all the rain. The second problem occurs. The day passes, and I head back to the factory just in time for the second shift, only to find out that rework will start only after 11 p.m. due to some production delays. For me it's cool, I get time to do other pending work. As the hour draws near, the product that needed rework was not ready, nor would it be ready by 11 p.m. So Jim called Jeff, told him the situation, to which he stated, if you believe the beginning of rework delays too much, go home and please come back on Saturday morning. No additional comment was given from us. We just agreed and he hanged up. Jeff was a fan of people following his instructions to the letter, and as you can imagine, this new statement pissed off the both of us, because Jeff was trying to avoid paying overtime for us just waiting idly and not doing this task even though we had more activities to do anyways. Also, he was very known for having a silver tongue for making promises and getting out of them for petty reasons. Happened to me already, and I also was kind of annoyed because of the parking lot incident that morning. I lost like 45 minutes in the rain just trying to get out. At the moment I only had 2.5 clocked hours in the morning and 3 more into the evening, meaning that even though he said those first 2.5 hours were overtime, I knew that wasn't in writing. So the next 5 or so clocked hours of Saturday morning would not be overtime, and if I didn't go, I wasn't going to have the total regular hours needed that week, and that HR would just deduct them from my overtime hours. At this point, Jim and I looked at each other, and I asked him to repeat what Jeff said on the phone. Cue malicious compliance. Jeff said if you believe, meaning that his words gave us free will. And we were going to follow his instructions to the letter. We were told by staff that at midnight rework process would start. And at 10 minutes before midnight, they would procure the people for us to train. We believed this wasn't a big delay, so we rolled the dice. We trained the staff, but the product was delayed again when we asked for a new ETA. It was 1 a.m., that was perfect. Again, we believed it wasn't a big delay. By the second time we asked, the production supervisor got wind of what we were doing and played along. These 30 to 60 minutes delays continued until 4 a.m. when finally the rework process started. But we only had 20 minutes on shift, to which I remembered the first instruction Jeff said. Supervise until they finish and stay overtime if needed. So us being the model employees, we complied. Rework was done by 7:10 a.m. Jim took off as soon as we finished. He had worked more hours in the morning. Just as I was sitting to make the report and send it via email per request, Brad arrives for his overtime shift and was pissed off when he learned we didn't go home and started until 4 a.m. and called Jeff to let him know the status of both Jim and me. I explained to Jeff via phone about how we complied exactly how he told us to, and that we were given small delays each time that we didn't believe to be too much. I also told him that Jim already left to sleep, but I could stay if he needed me to. Jeff was not vengeful, just a pain to work with, so nothing bad came out of this. He saw that I had outplayed him in his own game and with his own rules, so he admitted defeat and told me to clock out for the weekend and come until Monday. I got my normal hours plus extra 6 hours after that whole thing. Bonus, I exchanged back cars with Brad that same Saturday morning instead of Monday, which was nice. Oh, and the rework that was done that Friday night had to be redone again on Sunday because someone unrelated to us messed up and Jeff had to go himself to supervise because no one was available from our team. TLDR, the manager asked for a favor changing to night shift on the same day, promising paid overtime for morning hours. Tried to backpedal and send me home to avoid paying overtime because activity got delayed. Got outplayed by his own poor choice of words. That's it for the video, thanks for watching.